Okay. So first of all, my name is Jason Etter. I'm the Director of Cloud Operations at LTech. Joining me today is Superhero by Night and Amazon Web Services Senior Manager of Solutions Architecture by day, Mr. Miles Ward. He's the star of the show, and it's an absolute pleasure to have him here today for this forum. We're really looking forward to it, and which is why we have so many of you here today to listen into some of these great questions. Okay, so I want to give the audience a little breakdown of why we're here. As you may know, we held an open moderator session for you to submit questions. Many of you here contributed, and for that we thank you. Our hope was to make it tough for Miles. He gets a lot of questions, so we were hoping to make him, sweat a little bit. Additionally, all of you were able to vote on which questions were of most interest. That really helped us determine the best content for today. And Miles was even kind enough to let us keep this open until Monday night, which we actually ended up getting some extra questions for. So, okay, to make this even more interesting, as discussed through some of our social media feeds, we even offered a $100 Amazon gift card to whoever had the toughest, nastiest, grueling question from Miles. And after we go through the questions and listen from Miles, we'll actually announce the winner live. Okay, enough of me chatting. I want to hand this over to Miles, allow him to introduce himself, discuss a little bit about what's going on today before we actually get started with the questions. Miles? Ooh, Miles, you might be muted. Hey, Miles, I believe that there might be a little bit of an audio issue. I'm not sure if your phone's muted or not.
Hey, how about now?
Here we go. Perfect.
Well, there's the first technical question that may receive the Stumping Award, how to get the computer nerd to operate the GoToWebinar mute function. How's everybody doing today? I'm Miles Ward. I'm a solutions architect, clearly not particularly well versed in the behavior of the GoToWebinar platform. Appreciate everybody taking the time to get together with Jason and I today. I am really looking forward to hard, nasty questions. We at Amazon have always been focusing on customers and focusing on what you need, and I definitely know from some of the questions that I've seen, you need answers to some of the wrinkly problems in the corner. So I'm looking forward to being able to answer that stuff.
Thanks, Miles. I really appreciate it. So without any further ado, what I'm going to do is let's jump to the first question and let's get this party started.
Woohoo!
So the first question is from Kevin E. in Los Angeles, California. The question is, there's a perception that RDS is suitable for only smaller projects, and that if the project gets large or is having performance issues, that it's best to build and maintain MySQL on EC2. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, I would say, Kevin, that is a great question, and we certainly have customers that have looked at all sorts of different ways to manage relational databases, and I think some of the impetus for this question just has to do with instance type and storage configuration limitations in early versions of the RDS platform. The good news is that RDS, like all the rest of the AWS services, has been really aggressive about continuing to upgrade and update and take advantage of other new AWS services to raise the performance bar. So where, with standard EBS volume, you'd be looking at, on the order of, say, 1,000 IOPS or something like that for large-scale RDS deployments. Today, because of the power of provisioned IOPS, you can make a MySQL RDS instance operate at 30,000 IOPS, which is way faster. And we've also started to be able to deploy on larger EC2 instance types. up to and including the, frankly, truly Herculean CR1 8XL. That's 244 gigs of RAM for your database, at which point I would say there isn't any bigger instance that we've got for running MySQL. Now, the one place where today, if you're looking at a performance comparison between the two, where it might be useful to think about running on EC2 directly, is if you have a workload where you're using multi-master replication for EC2 instances or other computers, and are focusing on using solid-state storage, local ephemeral storage for the database. I would want to see multiple copy synchronous replication to rely on local ephemeral disk. But if you do that, the i2 8x large instances have up to 6.4 terabytes of local SSD. That gets you up to 380,000 read IOPS for a single instance. Now you consume some of that performance to maintain replication, and you have certainly a significantly more complicated deployment. But the power of those local SSDs is not something to shake a stick at. So I think another important measure to think about, if you look at not AWS but Amazon.com, there are only 5 relational databases inside of Amazon.com that operate in excess of 10,000 transactions per second. So another way of thinking about that is that 30,000 mark that RDS can do today in many, many, many cases for many, many, many workloads is already overkill. So certainly important to take a look at what your workload does and the normal kinds of query optimizations and performance tunings that you would do in any environment. And we've found many, many thousands of customers to be very happy with the scale that RDS provides. But like I said, if you need those local SSDs, you are going to end up managing it on your own.
Great. Thanks, Miles. Much appreciated.
Yeah, happy to help.
All right. Well, question 2 comes from Chris from Wolfboro, New Hampshire. And the question is, can you explain why I need to have multiple availability zones if I already have spun up multiple regions? I'm getting conflicting answers from my peers on the purpose of doing this.
That's a fun one. So there's a couple different dimensions to this. So if the first and simplest perspective is what you need for high availability is more than one copy of your stuff, then there isn't a particularly significant difference between, just in terms of count of copies between being in 2 availability zones or 2 regions. Now there's increased fault isolation and independence by being regionally distributed. Each region, is far enough away from each other that you're talking about independence from some of the potential physical causes of outages, like earthquakes or floods or Godzilla or whatever. So being in multiple regions is a pretty powerful step up in many cases from a high availability standpoint in comparison to just being in multiple availability zones. But, and here's where the tires meet the pavement, the real operational implementation of your high availability design depends on not just having more than one copy, but how you return to operation in the event of a failure. And there are mechanics, based mostly on the fact that the regions don't share things like S3 or Amazon Machine Image snapshots. You actually have to move snapshots or Amazon Machine Images from region to region, and that copy process takes time. So you can imagine in an environment where you are continuously deploying, you're talking about a web technology stack, you have that in both regions, and you deploy to both regions at the same time. In that kind of an environment, I don't think there's any advantage to adding multi-availability zone implementation just because you still distribute the load. You'd certainly also want to be using Route 53 or similar DNS services to distribute between the regions and be able to load balance and fail over between them. If you don't work that way, though, if your pattern is to deploy in one of the regions and then duplicate machine images across, if there's that delay or lag between the 2 locations, then you might find that it's not enough durability or enough security to have just the one copy with the new bits, the active bits in a single region. So you may want to run in multiple availability zones sort of in the home region to ensure that you have that durability. Another rationale for that, or another important component, is the high availability design for your application layer, your web layer, all those pieces is one thing, typically just deploying new code or pushing new updates of data. But for your data backend, your relational databases, your NoSQL databases potentially, in many cases, maintaining synchronous replication can be, depending on the amount of resources you're able to apply to the problem, can be expensive from a latency standpoint, crossing multiple regions. So you may want to be, and we have customers that are multi-regional at the web or app tiers, but are multi-availability zone at the database tier, just because of the higher performance for replication. So that's, I'd say the short answer is, if the whole of your application works just fine in each region, and you can delete the systems that are running in one region and you keep going, there isn't a huge motive to move to dual availability zones in a single region.
Great. Thank you very much for pointing that out.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Now we're on question 3 already. This is from Eric D. in Atlanta, Georgia. Is it possible to mount an S3 bucket to a Windows EC2 instance running Microsoft SQL to use for a backup maintenance plan without a third-party tool?
Yeah, so it's interesting. Possible is one of those very loaded words. So it's entirely possible for you to write a .NET application which interacts with the S3 .NET SDK and allows you to build up a system for interacting with an S3 storage system as if it's a file device, and you'd have an application layer that does the work to do that. That would be sort of a second-party tool. I'm assuming the first party in this case would be Microsoft with Windows. So Microsoft doesn't have a tool to natively interact with S3's storage subsystem. It's not designed to do that, and they haven't made comment as to whether they'll add something like that or not. It would make sense to me that they would, given the sort of incredible global popularity of the S3 stack. So the short answer is today there isn't a first party, and it's probably prohibitively expensive in comparison to the value extracted, to build your own second party tool for evaluating this. So I would actually strongly recommend the other way around and just say, yes, use a third party tool. So for SQL Server, the backup files that you construct, those are the kinds of things that will need to go into a file system. It's important that you recognize the limitations of treating an object store like a file system. So the workload that you described, write my backup to a file system, and then the next time I take a backup, write another one, that actually probably behaves pretty well in any of the file system mounting tools, like, and I think we have a couple examples that we captured. TNT Drive is one that works fine. Cloudberry Lab has one that works well. There are ones not only for Windows but also for Mac and for Linux applications as well. So many third-party tools exist that make that workload relatively easy. They did what I described in the second step. They used our SDKs or used our APIs and wrote up a file system layer. So I would recommend that for most folks it is probably not worth the extra time of writing all that software and validating a good third-party tool. And most of these frankly have been in practice now for years and have been tested by lots and lots and lots of folks. So I think they're a reasonable place to put your trust.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And thank you. And just to point out, we're going to go through several links and offerings like tntdrive.com and also the cloudberrylabs.com. And following the webinar, we are going to, when we publish this recording, we're going to make sure that all of those links are very easily accessible to everyone. just to make it a little bit easier for you so you can reference those without having to, quickly jot down with a pen all the different links that you might see here. Okay, great. Question 4. What is the cheapest way to set up an EC2 instance of Microsoft SQL in high availability configuration?
Oh, these are my favorite questions because I am an absolute penny pincher when it comes to compute, and I think the frugal folks out there who like finding a good deal on infrastructure are routinely delighted and surprised when they take a look at what it looks like to run all sorts of different systems on AWS. So I wrote the SQL Server on AWS Best Practices white paper, so know quite a bit about this. The interesting and kind of the only variable in this question is, what do you mean Microsoft SQL? So Microsoft SQL is actually available in quite a few varieties: Express Edition, Enterprise Edition, Web Edition, which is kind of a unique SKU, and several others in between, all sorts of different stuff. So, and what do you mean by high availability? So for some workloads, making a backup and restore process that runs once every hour, that's pretty highly available. But, you could certainly run, a pair of micro instances, have a couple megabytes of data in the SQL Server in there. You can just get SQL Server Express to start in the 613 megs of RAM that are on a micro. So that's 3 cents an hour. I suspect that that's about as cheap as you can get to meet the bare minimums of what you've described there. But for like a real world, big, healthy SQL Server HA setup, probably want to follow our white paper for Windows Server failover clustering and SQL Server always on. That runs on top of AWS using Enterprise Edition bits. You'd have to acquire your own licensing for that, but runs on AWS EC2 instances and is actually all pre-built with a CloudFormation template. So cheapest way to get at those kinds of instances would be to use reserved instances. So you'd look at how long you're going to run a given application for. You can certainly run that on relatively small instances. And I think you'll fit in the memory footprint on an M1 small, maybe an M1 medium is a little better pick. But in any case, that'll get you up and started. Now, in many cases, for real production systems, the biggest driver of cost isn't the implementation around high availability and having more than one server. It's storage cost as a driver. And so if you're able to deploy in an always-on environment, you might want to look, particularly if you're on relatively smaller data sizes, at things like our C3 instances, which have a little bit of local solid-state disk. You can use that for, maybe the secondary or the read-oriented copy of your data, whereas the primary write-oriented copy you could run on EBS or provisioned IOPS to make sure you can take snapshots and do all of those high durability things. The Windows Server failover clustering white paper, that's all available at aws.amazon.com in the white paper section, and certainly recommend folks taking a look at that.
That's true. A lot of content that you guys provide. You make it almost too easy to really understand a lot of what your offerings have, and even just how to enhance that as well. Question 5 here is, would you recommend using Redshift instead of running my own data warehouse cluster on EC2?
Yes. Next question. No. I think the market has been taken aback by the consumer interest, the business enterprise interest, and really the sort of revolutionary price point that Redshift brings to high performance, high scale data warehousing. I mean, this is not some simple, I put a database on a box and I serve it up and I say that's a data warehouse. This is a scalable, leader cluster node configured columnar store for super high performance access to OLAP workloads. And it's deliverable today at $1,000 a terabyte a year under heavy reservation. I mean, a totally unprecedented price point for many customers that I talk to, for the data warehouse software that they use for the maintenance of their license, not the purchase of the license, and not the purchase of the hardware, and not the purchase of the data center or the cooling or any of that stuff. Just the maintenance license for their software costs between 5 and 10 times as much as the total Redshift cost. It's the comparisons are just silly. And so, when we've talked to businesses that are used to, on the one side, that are used to data warehousing systems and looking at re-implementing like Accordant Media or Schumacher or Nokia, they've tried plenty of the other ones, and they ran on Redshift and were blown away. And then it's so powerful and so inexpensive a model for that kind of analytical processing that folks that are used to and built big expertise in other approaches, we're big fans of Hadoop at AWS. We built our own Elastic MapReduce environment. People run Hive and Pig and all sorts of silly things on top of that. And for some workloads, those are super efficient, super high performance, really inexpensive ways to get at data. But for Airbnb, the they have a whole white paper out now about the performance gap they were able to identify. Nokia, it was simple. It was costs half as much, goes twice as fast. Like that, doesn't get easier than that. And they are using very sophisticated, very advanced stuff, very inexpensive stuff on us as well. So there's a lot of good reasons why Redshift is at least worth a quick evaluation. Take a look at what it does from a query standpoint and the power that it delivers. Pretty exciting stuff.
Absolutely. Thanks, Miles. The next question here, I'm going to read the question and then jump to the next slide because there's some documentation that we mentioned earlier that you wanted to reference. And the question is, the metrics on CloudWatch do not give the entire health picture, even for extra large instances on EC2 and RDS. So how do you decide whether and when to go for Elasticache with either Redis or Memcached?
So this question from Niven, it's interesting. It's kind of got two halves, and I really, I want to assure folks that the CloudWatch system, is an interesting set of implementation decisions by us. We built a system that captures data in a way that ensures that we don't have and can't get access to the hypervisor layer that's what provides the EC2 instances to you. So things like reaching into your instance to look at memory utilization or disk utilization, like from a storage consumption standpoint, those are violations of the shared security model, which we've really built our success on top of. So the CloudWatch system is in many ways, in comparison to, like, say, Perfmon or IOStat or TOP or any of these things that sit on your computer, it's much more limited than that. Now, the nice thing is it doesn't have to be. So the reason for that subdivision is you don't want us prying into your virtual machine and getting that data out. There's no reason that you can't publish it to us. So there's a pair of scripts here from our development team, one for Windows and one for Linux, where you actually publish metrics, used swap space, empty disk space, memory utilization. These are pre-built templates for publishing that data as custom metrics into CloudWatch. So now you can get a more complete picture of the health of your instances. These are just examples, right? We show 5 or 6 metrics that get added to your list. Recognize that CloudWatch has a comprehensive custom metrics put API. So you can literally put anything in there. If you say you want to record, your application goes through a cycle every 30 seconds where it reports a status message, fine. Just put a metric about status message success or failure out of the CloudWatch metric. You'll see it right there. If it's super crucial to understand whether a given folder has a given file in it, awesome. Put that as a status message into CloudWatch. That stuff works fine. And you can use these monitoring scripts as templates for adding that kind of data. And the second half of the question was about using Elasticache. Should you use Memcached or Redis? should you use them for which workload. And I think that, you might find, for example, on a relational database, if your CloudWatch metrics showed, very, very high queue depths and very, very high read rates against storage, that might be a good, good example of a place where you're clearly querying a lot of data out. You'd also want to understand what the query patterns are. You're seeing a lot of the same queries over time to get to the same results. Caching technologies will add a lot of capacity and a lot of performance there. So, in most cases, the choice for Redis or Memcached has more to do with existing compatibility with your application stack. I mean, if you're, probably the original workload and still the most popular workload for Memcached being caching reads for MySQL databases. If you're off building something that's very, very different than a relational database, you'd have to make a good choice as to whether Memcached provides the behaviors that you need. So, I think data and richer data on the performance of your application, not only could be something that you push from CloudWatch, but there are lots of third-party tools as well that evaluate the performance of known applications or web applications, things like that, that they may also be able to help you make good choices about which caching strategies to follow.
Excellent. So question 7, any plans on adding CloudWatch alarms for EBS volume space remaining?
Yeah, so it's kind of a great follow-on to the previous question. Like, lots and lots of folks want to be able to trigger an alarm based on these more advanced measures. As long as you've followed the previous steps, you've created a custom metric on EBS volume space remaining, then you can set, if you publish that measure, it's important to make sure that you publish the right kind of number. So you can imagine if, you want to set a threshold that, if you're publishing the number of gigabytes or number of megabytes of free space, then your alarm is actually one that breaches at a low boundary, right? When I get below 1,000 or below 50 or something like that. Percentage would be difficult unless what you're publishing is a percentage, because we don't know how big your hard drive is, right? If the metrics that you publish is just how much free space you have, it's hard for us to compute a percentage. So certainly the design of the metrics that you upload is an important driver in how you'd set these kinds of alarms. But once that data is in CloudWatch, you can alarm on it. And if you can alarm on it, oh boy, then you can do all sorts of stuff. Because remember, you can push an alarm as an SMS notification, and now you can, take automated actions on behalf of that. Maybe when you go to, 85% of EBS volume is full, one way to do it would be to send an email to the boss and say, hey, you got to give me more hard drive space. Another way to do it might be send that SNS to an EC2 instance with an IAM rule that allows that instance to be no reboot snapshotted and a new instance constructed with a overwritten block device mapping for a larger drive, and then DNS change after a wait period to retarget all new operations to the new machine and terminate the old, almost out of hard drive space EC2 instance. I mean, that kind of automation makes it so that this kind of a normal operations task just goes away.
Excellent. I think you certainly answered that question. That's great. This question right here is, if you made a typo in a grub.conf file of a Linux instance in EC2 and reboot the server, how do you boot it in a single user mode to correct the error?
Yeah, the answer is you don't. EC2 does not permit access to the hypervisor tier for customers. It's just a part, again, of that shared security model that's really done so well for us and for our customers. So, the downstream question from that is, well, right, okay, but how do I fix it? So when you're typing in the grub.conf file, you're typing something into what is actually the Amazon machine image, which is typically stored on an EBS volume. So if your machine, you type this in, you change the grub file, you reboot it, and it won't reboot right, the machine doesn't boot properly, you'd bundle that Amazon machine image, you create a new image, so that you save your current state, frankly, including your mess up, which is okay. Start a different EC2 instance, and then create an EBS volume from the root volume snapshot from the first machine, the one you messed up. So now you can attach to that old volume to the new computer, which you can log into, and go in and fix the grub file. Then you'd detach the volume and then snapshot it again, run the new Amazon machine image, enumerating that snapshot as the one you want to start an EC2 instance from, and voila, it should boot right back up. You don't have to access single user mode in order to be able to manipulate the contents of the disk, because you can move the disks from computer to computer. Really a powerful tool.
Excellent. Perfect. Question 9 is from Bev here. We need better management tools for operations monitoring, provisioning, and the like. What are the most popular commercially available products as opposed to writing custom scripts for AWS monitoring and provisioning that are out there?
That's a great question. There's a lot of diversity. There are a huge number of products, and they have differing levels of penetration into different verticals and into different market segments and different value propositions for those. So, like for example, in the web apps and gaming segment, RightScale does very well. We have, if you're building applications that are continuously deployed or continuously integrated, we have lots of folks that are very happy with tools from Puppet and from Chef. If you're focusing on the monitoring side and you feel like you have provision pretty well worked out, Boundary and New Relic and CopperEgg are pretty popular tools. The provisioning component, there's a lot of new entries there as well. Ansible and Salt are pretty powerful. And we have provisioning utilities as well. CloudFormation and OpsWorks and Beanstalk make things a lot easier. So there are more tools yet than that. There's a whole other tier of stuff, and there are new tools being built all the time. But today, those are, maybe you can add. We're pretty excited about a partnership with Eucalyptus, where they've taken our Elastic Wolf product and converted it to a thing called Eucalobo that makes it easy to use systems both in a Eucalyptus environment and in the AWS environment, which is kind of nice. Maybe another set of tools worth mentioning are the Netflix open source software packages. They have several that fit into the general areas of more advanced control and monitoring, and Asgard as a very powerful provisioning system for some classes of applications. So lots and lots of tools that are out there, and that's hopefully a good overview of the most popular ones.
Certainly, and always take a look over at the marketplace too, and keep an eye there, because there's a lot of great products available.
That's a good point. Yeah.
Question 10: if AWS is so simple to set up and use, why do you recommend working with a partner for managed services?
It's interesting, Jason. When I read this question, I noticed that the author of the question, his name is startlingly similar to yours. We'll set this revelation aside, and I'll explain, because it's actually a pretty important point. I agree that AWS is easy. It really is. Now the flip side of that is I'm a raving computer nerd, and so there are some folks that, if you look at it from a time to value perspective, maybe you have an opportunity to build a system and your expertise isn't in AWS already. I guarantee you over time, this is a tool platform that you'll learn, but I would be willing to bet that you can pretty radically increase the rate of learning with a helping hand. And managed services does a lot to teach you the basics and manage the process of operating and ensure that those first several projects are super successful. And what you'll find is, in a lot of cases, some of the stuff that's got to get done to do it, it's certainly easy, but it's definitely undifferentiated heavy lifting. Same as the stuff that we talked about before. There isn't anything that AWS has done that makes it so you don't have to patch your stuff. There isn't anything that we've done that makes it so you don't have to run your backups or or make sure that you're paying attention to, all the resource utilization. And it can be a very efficient choice to have someone who's done this a dozen, 100, a whole bunch of times before, take their hands and make sure that they're using systems on your behalf in a very efficient way. And another component of that, another place is, we've made a choice at AWS, to build a business model that we think does a lot to de-risk innovation for businesses. If an experiment only costs you a couple dollars in infrastructure, maybe you can do a bunch more experiments. But we think there's other kinds of risks associated with innovation. You certainly might find a lot of value from a managed service partner around ensuring that you follow standard best practices for security and for operational resilience, that you have someone who has the experience to be able to guide you in the ways of doing stuff in a safe way. We also, setting aside the other benefits, I think a lot of folks are just trying to focus on what makes them differentiated and unique, right? I mean, if you're a startup, if you're an enterprise, and you're developing new software, or you want to get back to the part where you get value out of these tools rather than just sort of talk about working on them, having a managed service provider deliver value and deliver expertise is a pretty efficient way to get going.
Completely agree. Question 11 here says, at present, changing a security group from an EC2 instance entails an instance being first stopped. Some information available suggests that manually hot swapping keys can be done. Is there a better way?
Sure. So this used to be true. EC2 Classic or EC2 old school networking forced an EC2 instance to be within the context of a security group at all times. It's impossible to manipulate the security group or change the way that behaves. So there's one change that you can do if you think about it. Each security group is really just a collection of rules. And so just because you can't change the name of the security group that you're a part of, you can certainly change all the rules in the group. And all of the rules can be changed at any given time, even back in EC2 Classic. So while you can't say that I'm in from group 1 to group 2, you can make the rules in group 2 exactly the same as group 1. Now today, in Virtual Private Cloud and VPC, which is the default for all regions, so all of the new customers and the folks that have just gotten started, you'll find this question a little odd, because you can do a move between security groups. You can detach a security group and attach it to another instance. That movement, of course, necessarily totally disconnects that instance from the network until you've got a security group reapplied. But that kind of swapping is totally normal in VPC, and there aren't any kind of limits there. The keys part of this question is maybe a little unusual. There are folks that are trying to better understand and manage access by way of the SSH keys that are used to run EC2 instances. And those can't be swapped on instances without a reboot. That's a part of the hypervisor control tier. So maybe that was the real focus of the original question. So one thing that we've seen folks do, while there's a single key that's used, which provides that is provisioned by AWS to create connectivity, you can certainly add additional SSH keys and validate them in an instance. Once you've logged in with that first connection, you can add your company's normal keys. You can even do that stuff through continuous integration. We have folks that have Jenkins scripts that once they create a new key for a new developer, it gets pushed to all of the relevant instances. So lots of good patterns there.
Excellent, thank you. This actually, full disclosure, this is actually a question from me. This is something I was hoping you could elaborate on after attending reInvent, and I was wondering if you could just explain in greater detail the intent of Amazon Kinesis with Redshift.
Sure. So the Kinesis product, for folks that aren't familiar with, pretty brand new, came out right at reInvent. Kinesis is a really exciting, it's an exciting solution to some problems, that previously they're just big. they're big and they're complicated, and there's a lot of moving parts, and it can be really difficult to systematize real-time data processing. So we've had questions like, is Kinesis a queue for Redshift, a way to automate and systematize the load? I think it's probably important to think about Kinesis as having, many thousands of potential inputs and many potential outputs. Now, the unique bit with Kinesis is it's designed, and I think provides most value when it's delivering data not just to, say, your OLAP environment like Redshift, or but also to other environments, right? So the cool bit with Kinesis is you can do a little bit of processing inside of that real-time stream. So imagine, sort of SQS with compute in the middle of it. And that pattern, being able to process a very huge amount of data, being able to render that data down into something that's more useful, and then being able to support the loading of that data into downstream data resources is pretty powerful. So we have folks they take the same data and write it into their Redshift and their DynamoDB tables to be able to do totally different workloads. And then a set of that data that's less compressed to be stored in Glacier just in case they figure out some other smart thing to do with it later. And Kinesis can coordinate that all being done in a real-time way, which is pretty powerful. It gets compared to or contrasted with things like simple workflow that have much more stepwise logic about the individual operations. Kinesis is designed to kind of do the thing you want done and then move it on to the next step, and it really has just that one processing step. But in exchange, it has hugely wide scalability. It's designed to handle hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of megabytes a second of incoming data to be loaded into these kinds of tools. So those patterns where what you would have done in order to be able to accommodate this kind of incoming data flow would be to build a self-healing, auto-scaling cluster of EC2 instances, and now you're managing that whole stack of stuff. The reason that Kinesis helps with that so significantly is it's just really complicated to correctly provision and to, I think probably most importantly, to be able to operationally manage these kinds of streams. Because if they fail, there are problems. You really, that's the whole point of real-time data. You kind of want it all the time. So Kinesis plus Redshift is it's a pretty great pattern, but it's not the only pattern. We didn't expect that it's like they say, peanut butter and chocolate are really great together, but man, chocolate's great, all sorts of stuff. So
I happen to be a huge fan of peanut butter and chocolate, quite frankly.
Oh.
This next question is another question that actually has an adjoining slide, so I'll read it and I'll jump right into the following slide. What are my options for CIFS storage for a Microsoft SQL Server cluster? Please cover the spectrum from do-it-yourself to supported options.
Sure. So there's lots of folks that have struggled with this, and there are mixed messages from Microsoft about what the best practice is. Should I be running SQL Server on top of block or on top of file system storage? What about network file system? Do I have to have a shared storage pool? Do I not need a shared storage pool? So our always-on SQL Server failover clustering, or SQL Server always-on and Windows Server failover clustering model builds highly available Microsoft SQL Server, which I think is what the core of what it is that you want. We've fully templatized that and built it into a CloudFormation script. Makes it really easy to deploy. But we also know that for some patterns, folks want to be able to specifically use that shared storage component. So FIOS, they have a system called DataKeeper that provides that kind of sort of shared storage without the SAN as a model on top of us. And they do support the kind of multi-AZ replication that fits this same pattern. They're probably the most successful of the partners there. you can certainly go and think of that as the most integrated solution to the problem. You can move further downstream while staying in Windows and maybe look at DFS, distributed file systems. And there are also third-party distributed network file systems, things like GlusterFS and AndrewFS and a bunch of those, but most of them tend to run on Linux, and so Windows administrators get a little antsy about, that's not peanut butter and chocolate, it's peanut butter and kale. There's just a little bit of weirdness in that combo. So we found that for most Microsoft shops, that like a system like SIOS is a much more palatable, much more approachable approach.
Excellent. Thank you, Miles. And just to point out, I just looked at the time. We do have approximately 10 minutes left, so we're going to try to get to all the questions here, and we'll keep moving forward, but I'll keep an eye on the clock because I understand some people have some hard deadlines. So question 14 is, Redshift does not seem to compare a null value to a non-null value as hoped. Like A is greater than or less than null resolved to false. In fairness, Microsoft SQL behaves similarly. We handle this by coalescing nulls into empty strings. Is there a better way?
Yeah, this is just a syntax problem, and I hate syntax problems. So if you ask that question a little differently, if in your query instead you say, if you're looking at it, it's, instead of A greater than or less than, if what you were able to put in was more, quote, A, end quote, is not null, which is more the Oracle syntax for that kind of notation, you'd find that the resolution is correct. So it's just a persnickety SQL syntax issue.
Thank you. Question 15. Would you advise your take on, one, the pros and cons of Redshift versus AWS versus Aster and Teradata, and does Hadoop complement or cannibalize TDC current products?
So Amazon has a long history of staying focused on our customers and our products. And we spent a bunch of time earlier talking through the pros and cons of Redshift. And I would say maybe a con of Redshift in the spirit of vocally self-critical. We're looking at what it takes to run Redshift at smaller sizes. Right now, Redshift is designed. The smallest single instance you can run on is 10 cents an hour, but that's still, for the performance that it provides against query languages, we have folks that want to run it on all sorts of stuff. So they want to be able to run on even smaller systems. So you could potentially run, other stuff maybe at smaller sizes. Redshift scaled up to 1.6 petabytes, so I suppose we could say that we want to have a higher data storage maximum, but so far we haven't run into that with customers. From a Hadoop versus Redshift kind of a standpoint, I think there is a little cannibalization. We're okay with eating our own babies. That's kind of part of what it means to innovate on behalf of customers. There are some workloads that will run in Hadoop for scale reasons that aren't particularly efficient there, but that's just kind of the only place you can solve a problem that big. And Redshift does a lot to move the bar upwards in terms of being able to get after big data sets. We've found that most folks doing comparisons with Redshift to just about anything have come away very pleased. So.
Great. Question 16. AWS seems to be 2008 R2 based in regards to Microsoft CFT. 2012 changed the way things are done, but AWS seems to only no info for 2012. Is AWS thinking about a better repository and snippets library to adjust towards 2012 to make it easier to deploy using CFT?
So I'm not entirely clear. I think what you mean with CFT is CloudFormation templates. That makes sense with the sort of repository and library question. We do have a bunch of CloudFormation templates built on Windows 2008 R2, and we absolutely are investing in building additional templates for Windows Server in the newer version. So just pay attention to the CloudFormation script, and there's an automation and kind of developer team set of blogs that talk about new releases there. So you'll see more coming.
Excellent. Good stuff. When Workspaces is released to the public, will I be able to eliminate any need for on-prem servers for my general users, i.e., with the combination of Workspaces and pre-configured AMI, do I no longer need anything on-prem?
Sure. Yeah. So, the short answer is very, very probably, very likely. Any need for on-prem servers is a pretty wide potential surface area. Who knows what you do with computers when we're not looking? So I would suspect that the standard services of delivering a file store and delivering a SharePoint application and delivering access to your local documents or any of that kind of stuff, all of that can be delivered as services on top of AWS. And if it can be delivered over the web, it can be delivered to Workspaces. So you're in good shape there.
Excellent. I use AMIs for bitnami.org, which have default passwords for various services. In the 3 years using AWS, I have had 2 servers compromised due to forgetting to update these. How do you recommend hardening servers? Any tools?
Sure. So there are a bunch of tools. They all kind of work at this problem different ways. Certainly recommend folks, take the prescribed best practices in our operations and security checklists. But a cool startup, a good product that deserves a shout out from a company called Evident.io runs a whole series of security checks against your applications and probably would have caught this sort of thing.
Perfect. And again, these links will be available when we publish the webinar. Question 19, will Amazon ever offer the customer access to the hypervisor for security monitoring? I believe you already touched on this earlier. We have security requirements which require us to capture full network traffic flow but are unable to meet this requirement with AWS.
So there's 2 halves to this. Never say never. Amazon always listens to customers, but we have no plans, and I know of no way in which we would violate the current shared security model. Now, the flip side of that is you didn't say that you want access to the hypervisor. You said you want access to the full traffic flow. And that's totally different. You are the one who controls each EC2 instance, and you absolutely can record and capture every packet that goes to and from it today. You don't need any help from us to do that. So certainly recommend that you take a look at, there's a lot of different network tools. Boundary does some cool things around network pattern analysis. Lots of other stuff there to be able to help with those kinds of workloads.
All right, great. Almost to the last question. We might have just enough time and then announce the winner. AWS docs say that Redshift analyze compression used to recommend column encoding schemes for placing data in RS with no encryption scheme and then running AC. RS only supports drop add columns, so tuning schemes is a multi-step process. Is there a better way?
So the short answer is no. There isn't a better way. You're doing things roughly the right way. You load a table and then use create table as a select or insert into select to create additional tables with potentially alternate compression schemes for optimization. So far, from what we've found, over thousands of users, that our recommended compression schemes, which happen automatically when you load an empty table using a copy, Redshift goes through and chooses a compression scheme automatically by default, and a very large fraction of the time, those are, in the long term, those are the correct compression schemes. So you're doing it the right way. Load the tables up and let us figure out how to compress.
Great. All right. So I'm going to skip this one. It's really fun. Actually, I bet you can say this pretty quickly. Who was the last band you saw perform live?
Parliament, and God bless them.
Excellent. All right, this is the last question before we announce the winner. What are the key architectural tenets for creating a low latency, high concurrency transaction processing solution for mobile phones on AWS?
So there's a bunch of pieces there. So I'll do them as fast as I can. First, multi-regionality. Be as close to customers as possible. 2, use dynamic content through CloudFront. including the newly released HTTP 1.1 to the edge. So that means you can write data all the way back through our edges into your apps. That dramatically lowers latency. Transaction processing, you're going to want something that allows you to get to write consistency, but at low latency. DynamoDB is at 5 milliseconds for writes, and those are consistent writes. And you can do hundreds of thousands of those a second, not just 1,000. So I'd say Dynamo, our push notification tools, our queuing tools, and multi-regionality, and you'll hit that one out of the park.
Excellent. So now what I want to do is I just want to quickly announce the winner. Kevin Epstein from Los Angeles, California. Congratulations, you are a winner. We will contact you directly. Well done. You have done a great job creating a wonderful question for Miles, and we'll be contacting you through this. I just want to quickly point out, thank you so much for your time, Miles. This was exceptional. Again, we are going to post all these different links and resources out there for you to make it easier and allow you to be more engaged with Amazon. Additionally, we have talked a lot. There was a lot of questions that were happening back and forth as Miles was talking. The beauty of this is the partnership between Amazon Web Services and LTech is that the conversation can continue. So please feel free to go to ltech.com/manage-services or just reach out to us directly. My email is jetter@ltech.com, or just go to ltech.com and it'll pop right up and you can contact someone and we can start communicating and talking more about our services. Miles, I really appreciate it so much. This was excellent. I look forward to this being a tradition, the first of many. Please, again, here are all the different ways you can contact us if you have more questions. Really appreciate it. Miles, you have been exceptional. Thank you so much.
Jason and the LTech team, you guys did a great job, and thank you, everybody, for joining us today. I really appreciate it. Bring me harder questions next time. Come on, bring the hurt.
Yeah, let's make it hard. Maybe next time we'll do a $200 gift card if you can really make them sweat. How about that?
Yeah.
Thanks, everyone. Have a wonderful day, and talk to you all soon.
Bye now.